Thanks for having me back here in Whitman. I'm not too far away, so this was an easy one. I'm John Wingle, and I own Orphan Car Garage, and I'm right up the road in Abington, right across from Walmart on Brockton Ave, literally 6 minutes away. And my business, if you didn't meet me here before at my last presentation where we did sort of a cool vintage slideshow, car slideshow, my business encompasses buying, selling, and consigning vintage cars. Vintage 1980s back to 1930s. The name of my business is Orphan Car Garage because I primarily focus on the Orphan brands, the cars that a lot of people have forgotten about. Ramblers, Studebakers, Nash, AMC, I love that stuff. The underdogs, the Orphans. It also makes them more affordable to sell, so people can get into the hobby for less money than, say, if they were to buy a Chevy or a Ford. You can buy one of those Orphan brand cars that are just as nice for a lot less money. So I focus on that, but it's not my whole wheelhouse. I will have a Ford or a Chevy in the shop. I partnered up with my buddy Dave at Therapy Gardens, and he got me involved in coming to the various centers and meeting folks like you to do car presentations. So the first one I did, like I said, was a vintage car slideshow, and today I'm going to do a quick rundown of Lee Iacocca. He was quite of an automotive icon. What does everybody think of first when I say Lee Iacocca? What's the first thing that comes to mind? What's that? Okay, yeah. That that was a little bit later in his life. Yeah. Yep. But how about anybody else? Chrysler. Ford Mustang. I figured somebody would say that. Yep. He's best known to be the father of the Ford Mustang. His favorite car, and I think it was your favorite car, right?
He's designed it?
What's that?
Who designed the muscle car? Who designed it?
Who designed it?
Well, I mean, who designed the muscle car? I guess you could say, well, it's debatable what the first muscle car was, but it's actually before the Ford Mustang, but I won't get too deep into that. It was actually Rambler in 1957 with the Rambler Rebel. It was considered to be the first American muscle car. So, Lee Iacocca, well, I don't want to jump ahead of myself, so we'll get to the Ford thing. I don't want to... That's a picture of Lee before the U.S. government looking for the bailout money for Chrysler when he took over.
I read that story once.
He was born in 1924 in Allentown, Pennsylvania. His parents were immigrants from Italy, and they had settled in the steel town of Allentown, and his actual first name was Lido. Lido turned into Lee at a very young age. There was a family-run business in Allentown that's actually still there today called Yocco's Hot Dogs, Y-O-C-C-O. They have 3 locations still in Allentown today, and that was started by the Iacocca family when they first came to the U.S. in Allentown, and they're still there today. Graduated from high school in 1942, again, in Allentown, and he attended the Lehigh University where he got a degree in mechanical engineering.
You have any kids?
Yep. And then he got a master's degree from there at Princeton University, again, a master's in mechanical engineering. He was hired by Ford in 1946 in their engineering department, but he didn't like it. He didn't like engineering. He liked selling. He liked marketing and sales better. He asked Ford to put him into a marketing sales role, and they did, and they gave him the district of the Philadelphia area to run the sales department for the Philadelphia zone. It was while he was running that zone in sales in the mid-1950s, this was I think 1954, 55, 56, he designed a campaign called 56 in 56. And 56 in 56 meant for $56 a month you could buy a new 1956 Ford. And that had never been done before.
Same money, same year.
For 3 years, you could pay $56 a month and buy a 56 Ford. Nowadays, that type of campaign is, you hear it every day. But he He came up with the idea in 1956 in the Philadelphia sales office. It took off like crazy in Philadelphia. It spread nationwide. So 56 and 56 became a national Ford campaign.
He's president of the company?
So then, you're getting there, you're jumping ahead of me.
I thought that.
The guys in Dearborn took notice of that, and they called him to Dearborn, to Detroit. And he became the vice president of Ford real quick. I think I have the year.
Vision.
In 1960, he became the VP. By 1970, he was the president of Ford. But before that, he's the VP in Ford in 1960. The smallest car Ford's building at the time, and they're selling them like crazy, is the Falcon, the little Ford Falcon. The boys over at Chevy had the Corvair. We talked about the Corvair last time I was here. The little car with the engine in the back. You had one?
Yeah, I did. I had one.
I'd love to talk about that. It was one of my favorite cars. It's how I got into the car hobby was the Corvair, believe it or not. And they were long since discontinued before I was even able to know what one was. But Chevrolet came out with this Corvair called the Corvair Spider in 1962. And it was a convertible or a coupe with bucket seats, a floor-mounted 4-speed manual transmission, and gauge package, tachometer, and so forth. They introduced it at the Chicago Auto Show, Chevrolet did, in 1961 as a 1962 model, just figuring it would get some minor interest, and people went crazy for it. 4-passenger, 4-on-the-floor sports car that was affordable. They had a back seat, you know. So Lee Iacocca sees this over at Ford, and all they have is the Falcon at the time. Just like Chevrolet just had the 4-door Corvairs for a while, until the Monza Spider came out. Lee sees what's happening over at Chevy and how they can't keep up with orders on this new Corvair Spider. You know, personal sports car, 4-on-the-floor, bucket seats, the whole 9 yards. What does Lee do? Comes up with the idea for the Mustang. And the Mustang was designed off the underpinnings of a Falcon. If you look at a 64 Falcon underneath and a 64 Mustang underneath, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. The Mustang is built completely off a Falcon platform.
If you took the center ring out of the Mustang steering wheel, it said Falcon Sprint.
That I didn't know.
And the real name for the Mustang was supposed to be the Cougar.
The Cougar,
After the,
yeah.
Football team.
Yep.
But then they changed it.
And then we know the Cougar came out later, 1967, from Mercury.
When you say he invented the Mustang, what do you mean by that? Like, what does that entail?
It was his idea. It was his
So that means,
brainchild.
like, did he sit down and sketch it out?
No,
Did
well,
just,
he
like,
was
call
took-
a meeting with his people?
Yeah. He called a meeting with designers, and he took part in the design. And it was his idea to come up with this 4-on-the-floor, bucket seat, 4-passenger car to compete with the Corvair Spider. He took a big role in the design of it, but it wasn't solely him. And then we know Mustang today is still today one of the best-selling, car brands and most notorious. I mean, it's like apple pie, right? The Ford Mustang. Yeah. So, also to his credit, or not so much to his credit, he's also the father of the Pinto.
Really? Wow.
He came up with the idea of the Pinto over at Ford in 1968. He saw the need for a small, fuel-efficient car to compete with the Japanese that was starting to sell cars in this country like crazy, Honda and Toyota and Datsun. So in 1968, he led the team to start designing the Pinto. The Pinto sold well, sold very well. It became known as, it kind of got a bad rap with its gas tank issues. Does everybody know what I mean by that?
Yeah,
The rear end collisions, yeah. And they ended up recalling every Pinto on the road, I think in 1978. Ford had to do a major recall on every Pinto that was still on the road. It was the fuel filler neck where you put the gas in the car, where it attached to the gas tank was improperly installed. Improperly designed.
Yeah, I agree.
It was improperly designed. They could have gone the extra mile, spent a few extra bucks to do it right, but in typical American car fashion, the penny pinchers got involved, and they cheapened out on it. And,
Shortcut. I mean, you can't.
yeah, they took shortcuts. Yeah, at the expense of Americans. We talked about that a little bit last time I was here. Some of the things American car companies did wrong and paid the price for it later. Lawsuits, bad reputations. People bought more Japanese cars. They were tired of the American. Yeah. In 1978, Ford had one of its best sales years, and Lee was not. By this time, Lee was the president. However, Lee Iacocca and Henry Ford II never got along. They never got along, and Henry Ford II owned the company. It's actually, I think, Ford Motor Company is still a family, the only family-run automobile company in the world. It's still owned by the original family. It's still run by the Fords. But Henry Ford II didn't like Lee Iacocca. They never. It was like oil and water. They just never mixed. So even though Ford had a crazy busy year in 1978 and Lee was president of the company, you'd think he'd get credit for that. Henry Ford II fired him. He fired him. At the time Henry Ford fired Lee Iacocca, Chrysler was trying to lure him in because they needed a lot of help. Oh, what do we have here? That was his baby picture. So in 1978, Lee took the role as president of Chrysler, which was on life support at that point. Chrysler had introduced two cars that were supposed to save them in the mid-1970s, and instead it killed them, the Plymouth Volare and the Dodge Aspen. To this day, one of the most recalled cars in history. Poor build quality, poor design. Although most of them did have that bulletproof slant six engine, but everything around the engine wasn't very good. So the car got a horrible reputation right out of the gate because people had instant problems with them, and that hurt Chrysler's reputation even more. So they were on a downward spiral when he took over. He saw no way out of it except an influx of money. He needed money to bring this company back, and there was no way to get it. The company was pretty much broke. So he did an unprecedented thing. He went to the US government and asked for a loan. You probably all remember that, right? It was 1979.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Did they ever pay the loan back?
They paid the loan back, and they paid it back 7 years early. It was quite a big deal.
I saw on his story one day.
Yeah, he wrote a book in 1984. There's a lot about him. There's documentaries about him. Yeah. So the vehicle behind him here at the podium, and this picture's from 1983, I believe. The vehicle behind him had a huge part, if not the part, in saving the company, the minivan. Another one of his ideas, the minivan. The fun part about this is he had this idea when he was at Ford. He had this idea in mind over at Ford in the 1970s. It was called a Minimax. It was called the Minimax project, and he had guys designing this over at Ford because he knew that there would be a call for one of these small station wagon-like vehicles that could fit in the average garage. Henry Ford II hated the idea, hated it. And they think that's one of the reasons why they fired Lee, because he had spent time and money on designing the minivan at Ford. He took that idea and some of the guys that worked with him at Ford on that project to Chrysler. And they introduced the minivan. With the help of the government money, they were able to build it and design it. And in 1983, just as Chrysler started to get themselves back on their feet with the help of the government loan, the Plymouth Voyager and Dodge Caravan were introduced. And we know today, has anyone owned a Chrysler minivan? Yeah. I'm surprised there's just one.
No,
Four. Oh, you did, I'm sorry, yeah.
For a while.
It
It was my dad's Caravan.
Yeah. What year was it?
Oh, jeez.
Was it one of the early ones?
No, it was a later one.
I mean, I remember seeing my first one. One of the a young family in my neighborhood growing up bought one, a black one. I still remember it was a black Dodge Caravan. It was the early first year they had come out, and I thought it was the most odd-looking vehicle, but at the same time, still very cool. and so efficient. I mean, the sliding door on the side, you could fit 8 people in it. It was economical. The early ones all had 4 cylinders, so they were no rocket ship. But that coupled with the K car. Everybody knows the K car, the Plymouth Reliant, Dodge Aries, and then that spawned into LeBarons and Dodge 600s and all kinds of things. Even the New Yorker was spawned off the K car platform. They got a lot of mileage out of that K car platform, and that was also his idea, and that was also on the books at Ford when he left. The K car was supposed to be a Ford. Henry Ford II didn't like the idea. Probably didn't like the idea because it was his, and he just didn't like him. So we know now that Henry Ford II probably kicked himself for a lot of years in the 1980s as Chrysler sold every K car and every minivan they could buy.
Payback.
Payback.
Right.
And what did Ford come out with for a minivan? Does anyone remember the first Ford minivan?
Was it the Astro?
Astro was Chevy, but close. The Econoline was the full-size van.
Aerostar?
Yeah, the Aerostar, and what a piece of poop that was. Ford tried to put one together at the last minute when they found out Chrysler was selling every one of these they could build, and they put this Aerostar thing together, and what a piece of junk that van was. For 25 years straight, it was the #1 selling minivan in the country. I think Toyota surpassed them a few years back with the Sienna. And then they discontinued it. They don't even make the minivan.
That's for other car, but how come they bust the car now all day or bust up quickly? Bust.
Yeah, well, that's not a new problem. Does anybody want a moon pie, by the way? We forgot to pass these out.
My favorite.
I'll take one.
Take one for later if you don't want it now. No? No?
Oh, no, thanks.
You good? You good now for later? Midnight snack?
Yeah, no, oh, yeah.
Thank you.
You want take one. Just call me if you want more. Put your hand up. I got plenty, so. So he spent a lot of years at Chrysler. He started there in 1978, and obviously father of the K car and the minivan. But another notable thing that he did that a lot of people don't realize is he revived the convertible. The convertible was dead in this country. The last supposed American convertible built was the 1976 Cadillac Eldorado. And when Cadillac decided they were going to stop building the convertible, they advertised it as the last American convertible. And it was in 1976. It was the last produced convertible in America. Air conditioning had come into play, sunroofs, T-tops. Convertible sales had really dwindled to like 2 or 3% in car sales in the mid-1970s. And they also thought that the American Highway Board was going to outlaw them, and they were going to have strict rollover guidelines that a car had to pass in a rollover accident. And obviously a convertible wouldn't do very well in a rollover accident. So all that, the cost to build them, people's less desire to buy them, the upcoming rollover.
What time get too cold?
And yeah, well, that was an issue too, drafty and cool, yeah, yep. The car was discontinued and kind of went away. But Lee Iacocca in the early 1980s decided that it needed to come back. Those strict rollover regulations never happened.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Even I was concerned that anybody that already owned a convertible, you were going to have to put some kind of
Yes.
rollover protection.
Yeah,
in it.
yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah, it was early to mid 1970s.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And of course, it never happened.
No, it didn't. But there was a lot of concern. I worked in a parts place, and
Oh, did you?
people were for foreign parts, and people were already asking, what's available, or are you going to have to go and have something custom made?
Oh,
I
wow.
remember that time, and then yes, the rule and law never.
It never happened, yeah. And then the convertible kind of faded away into the sunset. Side note on the Cadillac thing. So Cadillac built their last convertible in 1976, and they advertised it as the last convertible, and this car is going to be collectible. They advertised it as a future collector car. And they sold a lot. They sold a lot of 76 Eldorado convertibles, way more than they did in 75, believe it or not. A lot of people bought them and put them away thinking that was going to be a great investment. What did Cadillac do in 1984 because of the success of the Chrysler convertible that I'll get back to in a second? They brought back the Eldorado convertible in 1984, and it brought on a class action lawsuit. 1976 owners that still had their cars, that they bought them because you told us this was going to be the last convertible and this car was going to be a collectible, and now you guys lied and you brought the convertible back in 1984. I don't think anything ever happened with that class action lawsuit, but it's a fun side note. But Lee, in the early 1980s, I think 1982, decided to cut the roof off of Dodge Aries two-door. He had the body shop at Chrysler turn a Dodge Aries into a convertible, just to have a fun car, to might get some attention. And everywhere he went with that car, he drove it himself personally. It was kind of customized for him. Everywhere he went with that car, people would line up and want to know where they could get one, where they could buy one, where they could order one. They couldn't yet. He just did it as kind of a fun thing and to see if there was an interest. There was such an interest that he decided to bring back the American convertible in 1982 with the Chrysler LeBaron and Dodge 400. Dodge had a version of it too. And I remember the Dodge 400 was advertised as the lowest priced convertible in the world. I think it was like $9,800 for the Dodge convertible in 1982. Again, another big success. The convertible was back in full force, and so the early 1980s for Chrysler were huge. They were making money hand over fist. Everything that man touched turned to gold.
More than Ford.
More than Ford.
You hate yourself.
Payback, right?
Yeah, it's
Payback. Payback. The Chrysler LeBaron convertible was, like the minivan, the #1 selling convertible in the world, I believe, its whole life until the LeBaron went out of production, I think, in 1995, when it was replaced by the Sebring. But right up until the end, the Chrysler LeBaron was the best-selling convertible in the world. Again, Mr. Iacocca's idea. I've had several of those LeBaron convertibles. Anybody have had one?
My friend's father had one. It was nice.
They're fun, yeah, yeah. You could put 4 people in them. They were economical. The parts were easy to, even still today, in fact. There he is standing with them. He even came out with the old Town and Country trim package on some of them, with the simulated wood paneling on the side. It was called the Town and Country, kind of reminiscent of the 1940s. I had one of these in my collection a couple years ago, a black one with the wood paneling. And you either loved it or you hated it. You know, people would come in the shop, that's the ugliest car I've ever seen in my life. Or some people would come in and say, that's awesome. And then if you're a Seinfeld fan, George on Seinfeld drove one for a few episodes, and it was the episode revolved around the car and the fact that it was once owned by John Voight. It was John Voight's. So that, to this day, when you see one of these online, inevitably someone makes a comment, was that John Voight's car? It's kind of getting old at this point, but it kind of got a little bit of a rebound in the late 1990s on Seinfeld. John Voight's LeBaron that I think it ended up catching on fire. Like I said, he wrote a book in the early 1980s. He appeared in Miami Vice. He was in a couple episodes on Miami Vice in the mid-1980s. And he also seriously contemplated a run for president in 1988, for 1988. And it's been said that if he had run, he had a very good chance of winning. There were polls that had been taken during his consideration that made those believe that he probably could have won, or at least had a really good shot at it if he had run. Would he have run as a Democrat or Republican? I didn't see that in the article. I don't know who he would have been running against in 1988, whether it was Dukakis or George Bush, right? Those were the two. I don't know which role he would have taken, but whichever road he had taken, he probably would have won. But it was his good friend Tip O'Neill, here in Massachusetts that talked him out of running.
Everybody like people now.
Yeah, Tip O'Neill was very popular here in Massachusetts, and I guess they were friends, and Tip O'Neill told him it wasn't a good idea to run. Why? I don't know. Probably sound advice. A fun side note, I worked for 30 years in the car business on the dealership side of things. And 10 of my years was spent on the auto mile in Norwood at the Chrysler Plymouth dealer, right at the bottom of University Ave.
You know him, Danny Buck Jr.?
I've met him. I don't know him personally, but I know who he is, and his dad. I remember his dad too.
Oh, big smart man in the business.
His dad was the big AMC guy. He was sold more AMCs at Bach Rambler than any dealer in the country.
Son doing it now.
Son.
Burning, yeah.
Yeah, Junior. But Lee Iacocca's daughter lived in West Roxbury.
Really?
She lived in West Roxbury, and every year she'd get a loaded up minivan, town and country minivan, and we'd get it delivered to the dealership, and we'd have to prep it, and she'd pick it up at our dealership. And he would send it out from Detroit for her and her family. West Roxbury or Roslindale, she may still be there, I don't know. Chrysler, as we know, after he left, he retired in 1992, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, 1992 he retired. And after he left, we know Chrysler went through a lot of turmoil, buyouts, more almost on the brink of bankruptcy several times. And they tried to pull him back in a couple times, but it never worked. He did work with them at one point. He even did some advertising for them in 1995 or 1996, but he never re-entered the car business solely. He actually invested into an electric bike company later in life and olive oil company. That's what which was actually very successful. But a side note to this, during one of their takeovers, one of Chrysler's many buyouts, 1994 it was Mercedes-Benz, and then it was a private equity firm, and then it was Fiat. During one of those buyouts, I forget which one, he lost a bunch of his pension and his availability of a car for the rest of his life that was in his original retirement plan. That went out the window because Chrysler was no longer Chrysler. It came back as a new company to avoid a lot of its old debts and creditors. Part of that deal was him losing some of his benefits, which is kind of a shame because if it hadn't been for him, they wouldn't have still been around to even take over or buy out, you know? Anybody have anything they want to share as far as what I've said so far? Cars you've owned, or we don't have to stay on this subject.
When Ford wanted a race car built, they went to Carroll Shelby
Yes.
to do the Shelby GT.
Yes.
Okay, so when he went to Chrysler, he did the Shelby Daytonas.
Right.
I think they were only a four-cylinder turbocharged.
Yeah, early on, he linked up with Carroll Shelby. He actually, I'm glad you brought that up because it was part of my original presentation. He convinced Ford to get back into racing in the 1960s when he was still at Ford. And has anyone seen the movie Ford versus Ferrari?
Yep.
You saw it? It's a great movie. Yeah, you don't have to be a car person really to enjoy that movie. It's a great movie. And he played, not him personally, but he's in the movie. Someone portrays him convincing Ford to get back into racing. They didn't want to do it. They finally gave in. Carroll Shelby got involved. They end up winning the Le Mans in France with a Ford. They beat Ferrari. Ford versus Ferrari. It's a great, great movie. Talks a lot about the auto industry, but a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. You don't have to be a car person to enjoy the movie at all. I know a lot of people that aren't into cars and love the movie, and he's got a big role in that, bringing Ford back to racing. And then in the 80s, he still had his relationship with Carroll Shelby from Ford. Carroll Shelby was still having fun with cars, even though he was older. And they did some Shelby Daytonas, some Shelby Chargers, the GLHs, little front-wheel drive turbo cars, but they were little rocket ships. And then his predecessor, Bob Lutz, I think his name was, is credited for the Viper. which was right after his tenure. So Chrysler continued their racing heritage, and still even today, with the Challengers and the Charger Hemis, they're one of the only companies that are still building high-performance, gas-guzzling cars. Although I did just hear recently that Dodge is going to discontinue the Challenger and the Charger end of this year or next, and they're going to, which is really a shame. They're going to replace them with electric cars.
Oh, they're coming up. You should.
They're going to have an electric Charger, I think. Charger, that's kind of, well, kind of a cool name for an electric car, I guess. That's about all I have on Lee. But I'd love to hear your stories or anything that he died in 2019 in his home in Bel Air, California, from complications of Parkinson's disease. And that's one of the last photographs of him. So I'd like to hear any stories that you guys have car-wise. It doesn't have to be about Lee Iacocca or the Mustang, although I'm sure people have Mustang stories. Did you own one? Did you have a Mustang? You said Mustang was one of your favorite cars.
Camaros were mine, not Mustangs.
Oh, Camaros.
Yeah,
You told me that last time. I remember that. I thought you said Mustang this
Chevy
morning.
girl.
That's right. I remember you from last time.
I had 4 Mustangs. First one was a 65 GT convertible, 4-barrel, 4-speed. Somebody hit my rear quarter, totaled it. So I bought an ex-race car, which was a 64.5 Mustang that had no motor or transmission. I took the motor and transmission out, put it in that car, and they had a roll bar in it and stuff. Then I used that as my summer car. My winter car was a 66 fastback.
Oh, those are rare.
4-speed, 289.
Yeah.
Dual exhaust, headers on it and stuff. And then I bought a parts 66 notchback, just for parts.
Just for parts. The fastbacks are rarer than the convertibles. They're very sought after today. They're good-looking cars
And
too.
the guy I sold it to still has the fastback.
Does he really?
The guy I sold the 64.5, which is his cousin, my brother-in-law's cousin, still has it sitting in his garage with less than 70,000 miles on the car.
Wow. Don't forget me, I'm right up the road.
I know you are.
I have a Mustang story. When I was 14, my grandmother, who lived in Avon, had a Mustang. She had a 67 blue Mustang Coupe. And she actually had the license plate that said Avon on it.
Avon?
Yeah, it said Avon. My grandfather had been the police chief of the town.
Oh,
Like
okay.
a big deal. So anyway, so she retired and moved to Arizona. And she gave me the Mustang, but I was only 14. So they took it and they put it in the garage, the garage, and were going to save it for me until I turned 16. And then my mother's car broke down, so she took the Mustang to use temporarily and totaled it.
You never got to drive the Mustang. Do you know the subtle differences, and you can maybe educate me on this, because I think I know of 2 subtle differences that differentiate a 64.5 from a 65?
Oh yeah. The hood has a little 1/4-inch indent on the sides. That's the one big difference.
Also, I think the passenger seat in a 64.5 doesn't adjust, but it does in a 65. Someone told me the passenger side seat doesn't slide. You can't adjust it.
Adjusted in the one I had. But then again,
Maybe.
that was with a race car.
Might have been early, or an early 64.5. Ford called them 65s. We call them 64.5s because they came out in the spring of 63. April. Most cars got introduced in the fall of the year prior. This car came out in the spring of the year prior. Ford called it a 65, but it became known as a 64.5 those first 6 months.
Instead of a 289.
Right, that's another difference,
With
right?
the generator on them, they all have
Yeah.
generators, and 60, I think halfway through 65 or so, then they started putting the alternators in them.
Right, right. And then to get to nitty gritty, someone told me years ago that the door lock knobs
You're right.
are color coded to the interior on the 64.5s, but are black in 65. I don't know. I mean, you can really get down into nitty gritty. Guys that really, really get serious about restorations and correctness,
Wasn't the Mustang debuted at the World's Fair?
Yep, the New York World's Fair in 1964 at the Ford
It was a
display.
big
It was a
interest, really.
yeah.
started the fire for the demand for them.
And they actually recreate that scene in the movie. Go ahead, you're all set.
Yeah, can I just say
Yeah.
something real quick? Hey, if I haven't met you guys, I'm Dave. I own Therapy Garden, so I partner with John. I've known John for, well, a very long time, we'll say.
Several years.
Several years. You know what? I met John at a bar. It was a bar fly, Friday afternoon.
Friday night after
Friday
work.
night, we used to go to Pizzeria Uno at the Westgate Mall.
At Brockton.
Remember my mother would come up sometimes
Yes.
to meet us? And
Good guy, crazy guy, crazy.
Oh, it's always been crazy,
yeah,
yeah.
he's a little nuts. But
I was working in Norwood, driving down 24. I'd stop at Uno's.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But I just wanted to say, I have to scoot early. I'm doing a presentation tomorrow, and I have to go buy chocolate. I'm doing a chocolate presentation. I had a woman that did them for me, and we have parted company, so I own the chocolate one tomorrow. So, but I wanted to just mention that John really, he doesn't make a lot of money doing it. Like, I don't pay him anything. He absolutely loves doing this, and he is a walking encyclopedia, as you guys can tell, of automotive knowledge and stuff. And that kind of feeds into one of the things that, we work with about 100 different senior centers now, different levels of engagement. Some we're there every month, some, a couple times a year. But one of the things they've asked is for more things that bring men in. And that's where I kind of got the idea to reach out to John, and really that has worked. This is the first time ever, and I've been doing this for a year and a half, that there are more men than women in a session. In fact, this is the first time ever that there's more than 3 men at a time? Maybe?
Yeah, I did a couple on my own where it was close, but this is definitely the ratio.
It's nice to see you guys coming out. So keep checking those bulletins, because I'm going to push John to keep doing more of these. He wants to stop at the 2, the Lee Iacocca and the vintage car. But I think he's too good to stop. So we'll get to it. But listen, you guys have a great.
I don't want to get boring.
Yeah.
Do you bring plastic cars to the different senior places?
I don't. I have nothing.
It's
to do
tough.
With it.
I've tried to arrange that myself. It's tough. I have some that I can bring. I haven't yet. I don't
There's
know,
one
but-
going on the 17th where my mom is. That's why I was just wondering. If
Yeah, a
you guys
lot of the
be
centers have
involved.
asked John
It's
to do
crossing over
something like
Brockton.
that. So.
Oh, really? I didn't know that one.
Yeah,
Okay.
across
Yeah.
from where the Pizzeria Uno was.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah. They're doing a car show there?
On the
It's hard to
17th.
organize and arrange. It's a lot of work, and a lot of car clubs don't want to put the time and effort into it. It's not just picking up the phone. You got to advertise it. You got to have food. You got to have drinks. It's a
Probably
tough.
have to have a permit and something.
You got to get permits. Sometimes you need a police detail. There's a lot to it,
This is
you
a
know.
dead-end street, so I don't think the police detail's going to be that necessary.
Well, anyway, I'm going to leave you guys with John.
Go ahead.
You guys have a
Take
great
care.
day.
Bye,
Thank
take
you.
care, thank you.
I thought of bringing cars, but I have cars that I could bring, and you're all welcome at any time to come up to the shop. I'm right across from Walmart. You know where I'm at.
Yeah, right beside 10th District.
Yeah.
Dana was saying that you were supposed to do a
I am.
show type of thing over there.
I'm going to, yes. We just finalized the plans yesterday. So on October 8th, it's a Saturday, we're doing a little thing at my shop. You're welcome to come up from 11 to 3.
Oh, being many.
It's going to be all vintage cars. My collection will be on display. And I partnered up with 10th District Brewing Company right next door to me. So when you come in and display a car, or you come in as a spectator, you pay $10. I have water, pastries, hot coffee, and you get a beer at the brewing company, all included. Any money that's left over at the end of the day goes to Toys for Tots.
Right.
Because my buddy next door at Speedy Oil Change does a Toys for Tots run every November. So any money that's left over from my October shindig is going to go to him for Toys for Tots.
Nice.
So you guys are all welcome to come if you. That's October 8th. And I just finalized the plans with Dana yesterday at the brewery.
Yeah, because I was talking to him Saturday.
Yeah.
He was mentioning something about
Yeah.
it. And on another note, back to what you talked about, the cars and stuff, Pontiac had the GTO, which basically
Right.
light car, big motor.
Right.
And Iacocca saw that and said, we have to.
We got to do something here. Yeah.
And if you look at the 64.5, 65 Mustang dashboard, it's the same thing as a Falcon.
Same as a Falcon. Yeah. 66 got its own,
Right.
but 64.5 and 65, the dashboard looks just like a Falcon.
Except for the GTs had a different.
They had the 66 style dash in it, I think.
With an
Wow.
amp meter gauge instead of a volt. Didn't have.
Oh, I didn't know
had the
that.
Amp meter one.
I didn't know that.
Because I have one in my cellar.
Do you really?
Yeah.
And then they had a rally pack. the gauges that mounted on the steering column that had the tachometer, and I forget what I don't know what the other gauge was. I know tachometer and something else.
It might have been an oil pressure gauge.
Might have been, or might have had 2 gauges in it. They called it a rally pack. It was an option. It was a fun. You could customize a Mustang, soup to nuts. It could be a little grocery getter with a 6-cylinder engine and a 3-speed stick, or it could be a super muscle car, or it could be luxurious with that pony interior, the 2-tone interiors with air conditioning, power steering.
And the Grande interior later on from the
Grande, yeah. So then the Mustang got big and fat, right? Remember in the early 1970s? Yeah, it got big and fat. I actually kind of like those. Some people don't. And then Lee's idea in 74 was to bring it back to its roots. Of course, we had the oil embargo and the gas prices were going through the roof. So the Mustang 2,
Really little.
the Mustang 2 came out, and people call it the Pinto Mustang, and which I don't think it has a lot in common with the Pinto, but people call
The front suspension.
It was a Pinto.
Are you sure?
It shared the same tie rod ends. It shared the ball joints.
Yeah, the front
lower
suspension was the
control arms,
same.
The rear differential, the whole differential, the banjo, it was the
Oh,
same.
see, I thought I had read an article that said that was a fallacy, and it didn't have, it had some shared parts, like anything then, but not as much as people thought. But
It was a terrible car. My sister,
well, I know. If
I used to get parts off Pintos to put it on. That's why I know everything the Pinto fit. Nothing but a Pinto with a prettier body.
Yeah. If you look at one, if you spend enough time looking at one, you can see where they tried to harken back to the original with the cove cutting on the side and the grill and the round headlights, but it just didn't. They sold a lot of them, but they sold a lot of them because it was the right time to introduce it. It was good on gas, and it was still a little sporty. Charlie's Angels made them kind of famous because the girls on Charlie's Angels two of them drove Mustang 2s on the show.
So did you go to the car show down at Marshfield Fairmount?
I didn't make it this year.
I saw a Falcon there, a 64. You know what they're going for a price for a 64 Falcon? It had 289.
Oh, they're going up through the roof.
Take a guess what they want.
Was it a convertible or a hardtop?
Hot top.
2-door hardtop. Nice car, 289.
Yeah, nice.
I'm going to say high 20s.
No, 20,000.
Okay, they can be high 20s
Yeah.
if it's a real nice car.
A convertible one there, and it was 22, and it was, all right shape.
Yeah.
It's nothing really showroom quality, but it wasn't
If we
bad.
knew then, if we knew now what we knew, if we knew then what we know now. I had a 64 Falcon Convertible I bought in the 90s for like $4,500, and it was a nice car. I had it for about 10 years. I did make money when I sold it, but if I still had it today, I could have made a lot more money. And it was just a little 6-cylinder with an automatic. But it was a convertible 64. 64 is my favorite year Falcon. I love the spear down the side. I like the
And
grill.
65 was a little different.
Little
on the back
different.
flare.
They two-toned them a little. 65s are okay, but and even the 63s are a little bit more rounded, a little bit more like a bathtub. I don't mind those either, but the 64 is my favorite. The 64 Fords in general, the Mustang, the Galaxy, the Falcon, it's just a great. I love those designs from Ford that year.
That Falcon was on a Fairlane frame on that one, Fairlane platform.
Yeah.
And you could put a 390 in that.
Yes. And that's why the Corvair never was able to take off any further than what it did, because the turbocharger only did so much, and the Mustang you could put those big V8s in, the GTO. So then Chevy gave up on the Corvair and came out with the Camaro.
Nader didn't help it either.
And Nader didn't help it. Nader didn't help it. I mean, Nader wasn't completely wrong. Some of the stuff that he points out in his book,
Well, the earlier
he's
ones.
not wrong. Again, GM cut corners when they designed that car too, the rear suspension and so forth. The early Corvairs have real tricky rear
And the
suspension.
64 you have down at your shop, the white one?
It's a 63 Spider. It's a
So it has a
Spider.
turbocharger.
It's got the turbocharger in it, yeah. That car needs a little bit of love, but I'm going to give it, I had to get a title for it because the guy that owned it had passed away and the family didn't know what the title was.
But they changed the rear
So that was
suspension
fun.
on the 64.
64,
And then 65 was
completely, the late design Corvairs are excellent cars. They're great cars, and they're now starting to come around and they're starting to go up in value. They're still affordable, but they've gone way up in the past 10 years. 64, they put, the early Corvairs, when you took a tight turn, the camber, the rear wheels had a tendency to literally tuck in under the car as you took a hard corner with speed. And that could get a little squirrely, as you can imagine. So in 64, they put a leaf spring in from side to side to keep the wheels balanced. So 64s corrected a lot of the issues that Ralph Nader had with the car.
I must have had that in my 64.
Yeah, if you had a 64,
I was going to the World's Fair that year. I turned off the Merritt Parkway and it just started to rain. And when I made the turn, forget it, the car went to hell. It started spinning and spinning.
Oh.
And then I went up underneath the bridge. There was like dirt maybe from here to there. I was spinning around the dirt. But I was lucky it didn't flip.
yeah, it
Okay?
didn't flip, no.
It did not flip.
Most of them didn't. Everyone got in their head that they
She
did.
was in midair, because I don't know if it had a seatbelt, but we never put
You
it
don't
on.
put them on, yeah.
Never put them on, you know? God,
Yeah.
Is that your last date?
that, actually,
Would have been mine.
no, she fell more in love with me.
He's a daredevil.
Yeah,
Over at the Walmart parking lot on Fridays, they had a later 60s Corvette there, and it had the Crown conversion in it.
Really?
It was kind of like a goldish color. And I saw it coming home, because I live in Whitman here. I saw it coming home in a driveway in East Bridgewater.
Really? I haven't seen one of those in years. A company named Crown built a kit that you could put a V8 in the back of a
Yeah,
Corvette.
mid-mounted.
Yeah, yeah. That company went out of business years ago. So I haven't seen a Crown.
In the 60s, the military began buying their quiet times. They used to be Jeeps, and they began buying them from Ford. They were called M151A1s. And they had the same trouble with the rear suspension. It used to tuck under. And on the dash it said, do not drive over 40 miles an hour.
Really?
A lot of fatalities in Germany.
Because of that? Really?
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that. Ford built Jeeps for the war just like Willys did. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Ford had a Jeep. Jeep derived from GP, general purpose, correct? It was GP, general purpose vehicle. And then GP turned to Jeep, Jeep. And then it just took off as Jeep. But it started as GP, general purpose. They were built for the war.
What?
Yeah. I worked for Jeep dealerships for most of my career was with Chrysler, Jeep, and Dodge. So I actually started with Chrysler when Lee Iacocca was
So Jeep
president.
Was any truck train? Jeeps? What?
They have a reputation for being able to handle most any terrain, and for the most part, they do. I've had several of them. I've had a lot of good luck with them, and they do.
Yeah, right.
They're great in the snow. They were great in the snow. They still are. I mean, I never worried about having to go to work in a snowstorm. Like the woman here said earlier, I live on a main road in Weymouth, and you get that big pile at the end, and I got to go to work at 7 in the morning. I don't have time to shovel, so I'll shovel when I get home. I would put that Jeep in four-wheel and just, it would go through that pile of snow like it was hot butter, like it wasn't even there. I loved my Jeeps. I still have one.
His father had a couple like international scouts.
Oh, those are good. Yeah. Collectible now, too.
Yeah, they're gone. Somebody told them out of where they were, up in the woods in Maine. But they were a slant 4.
Really?
It was an 8-cylinder, cut in half, an
Chevrolet.
international motor.
Pontiac.
Chevrolet engine.
Was it?
Chevrolet valve covers, push rods, and pistons fit in that.
Yeah, it was a
I
slant
rebuilt
4.
them.
Well, Pontiac did a slant 4 in the Tempest early on. It was called the Trophy 4, and it was a V8 cut in half. John DeLorean actually came up
The
with the idea.
transmission was in the rear end.
Yes.
Tempest, was it Tempest?
Tempest.
Pontiac Tempest.
61, 62, 63, yeah. And it was a Corvair transmission in the back. Yeah. I like a lot of cars that were considered terrible. I have an Edsel, I have Corvairs.
Yeah, had a 2-speed automatic transmission behind it, but
Yeah.
a power
Power Glide.
melded to its rear differential. It was way beyond GM's.
And it had the rope drive through the center to run the transmission from the front-mounted engine, and it was I guess it vibrated a lot, and
It was,
yeah.
No one would ever say, listen, put this in another car, I'll buy that too.
There's a 62 Tempest wagon for sale down in like Pennsylvania, and I'm so tempted. But it's got that Trophy 4 with the rope drive and the Corvair transmission mount in the back. It just spells trouble.
Now, didn't Oldsmobile also have the inversion back around really.
Well, Oldsmobile had the F-85, which turned into the Cutlass.
They didn't have
But I don't think they had that. I think Pontiac was the only one to do that.
The F-80, the Oldsmobile had a two-piece drive shaft with a center, big center bearing in the middle.
Oh.
And you would have that precisely lined up.
Balanced.
Alignment, because your center bearing could move back side to side a half an inch. You had to have it precision mounted, but it also could be shimmed to come down and go up. You had to find a nominal, because when you were driving, the rear differential would go up and down, causing this.
Sure.
It was a little bit of a design nightmare. I'm not sure why they did it, but they could have, I think they could have put a
single shaft.
in there.
Yeah.
They did that, and when it ran right, it was nice. It was smooth, but I remember repairing a few of my friends, and I had to use chalk on a stick with vice grips held to the chassis of the car and watch it run out where the run out was.
Really?
Compensate for it.
Wow.
Try it again on a lift before you send it on the road, because people come back 5 minutes later, it's shaking at 60 miles an hour.
Wow.
The car was not dynamic.
And the old F-85, my father had one, it was 215 aluminum.
Yeah, aluminum V8. Yeah, little
And they had
V8.
nothing but problems with the head
Yeah.
gaskets.
They
Yeah.
didn't have a problem, they just leaked all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they, a bad design.
You fill up your car with gas, you put another quart of oil and 2 quarts of antifreeze. and you put it
Like
in
the
your-
Vega.
White after a while.
That was like the Chevy Vega.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You said, check my gas and fill my oil when you went to the gas station.
that was a trouble.
Aluminum engine also. And the Corvairs had aluminum engines. And they were notorious for oil leaks.
Oh, yeah.
But,
One thing, Corvair, that was a horizontal closed engine.
yeah,
That was unique. because
OP.
Boxster
The only
style.
other company that's ever seriously used horizontal closed is Subaru.
Oh, no, Volkswagen.
Volkswagen.
Oh, that's right.
They
I
were
think Subaru
responsible
too.
For the torsion bar suspension,
Yeah.
Volkswagen. Plus the vans with the sliding back doors, Volkswagen had that first. And then everyone copied.
Well, that's true, yeah. You could go back on the minivan thing. Even the Corvair Greenbrier,
Yeah.
the Corvair vans were sort of a minivan, you
And
know.
the beer style claw locks that they have for cars, those were basically designed off the early Volkswagens.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Interesting. Well, that about does it for me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me here on this rainy day.
Well,
Come
next
back
time we go to
some-
I'll be back.
Come back someday?
Yeah, oh yeah. It's my second time here anyway. You're right down the road.
Okay.
Sometimes he's sending me to
So I have a question.
hours.
Look store across the street from Walmart. Are you in the prefab building to the left of that, across the parking lot?
That's the brewery. So then after that is heading this way is Speedy Oil Change, Speedy Car Service, and then I'm next to him. So I share a parking lot with Speedy. And then after me is Anderson Fireplace, Anderson Insulation. I'm right in that complex.
So you're in the building that the brewery's in the front?
I'm next to him. If you're looking at the brewery, I'm 2 buildings over to the left, directly across from Walmart. I look right into dead center of Walmart. The brewery's at the entrance to Walmart with a light. I'm just 1 building down.
There's the package store, then was Mr. Tire, but it's
Yeah, Mr.
Speedy,
Tire
and then I'm
Speedy.
right next to him.
building next to that.
That's me.
Okay.
I share the parking lot with Speedy. Yeah.
We have to revive a Wildcat.
A Buick Wildcat? Oh, I love those.
It belonged to my great uncle. And after he died, my great aunt drove it for a little bit, and then she got Parkinson's and couldn't, so my brother has it now.
Really? How long has it been sitting?
Decades.
Really? They were great cars. She mentioned a Buick Wildcat.